All right, we are on to lesson 4 with War in Asia. And when we last read, we talked about how Germany declared war on Poland. We talked about how America was basically helping our future allies and unofficial allies at the time through the Lend Lease. Um, and how the Selective Service Act came out, and so all of a sudden there was a lottery. If you're chosen by the lottery, you had to join the military, like it or hate it. So here we are, war in Asia. First word is Axis powers. Say Axis powers. The alliance of Japan, Italy, and Germany in World War II. You remember those countries as being our enemies, or the United States enemies. JIG, that helps, or GI, Japan, is kind of another way of remembering it. Asset, say asset, something of worth that someone owns. So maybe your parents' house or car, or maybe you have that private jet or yacht that you guys are not telling me about. So assets is there. Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? You may have heard of that. Infamy, say infamy, disgraceful or lacking honor. So if you get the word famous in there, you might have heard maybe played the video game Infamous. He goes around and does a bunch of bad stuff. Okay, so infamy is famous for the wrong reasons. Okay, like the Joker might be someone who has lived in infamy or a fictional character. All right. It's not a long section because it's right to the point, and it is about how America enters World War II, and that is because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Here we go. The Japanese government announced that it intended to rule all of Asia, including China. That type of control went against America's open door policy. The United States had established the policies that all nations would be allowed free trade with China. America protested Japan's actions. However, Japan continued its plan to create an empire. Japan joined Germany and Italy in an alliance. These three countries became known as the Axis powers. So, Japan, Italy, Germany, they're the Axis powers. And again, they had already, Japan had invaded China. Going on. Japan invaded the French colony of Indochina in June 1941. Indochina was just south of China. The United States became concerned that Japan was gaining too much land. America decided to stop selling oil and steel to Japan. Japan desperately needed oil to continue with its plan. The United States also offered a Lend-Lease program to China. Okay, so as they had actually, the book doesn't talk about this unfortunately, but they invaded 1931, also 1937, and did some really bad things in China, including the raping and killing of over 400,000 civilians in China. And so the United States is giving it support because China was basically in a state of civil war and kind of in between on things, but they were not friends with Japan. And they're like using like little air bases and stuff like that. So as a result, we saw, and since Japan had allied itself with Germany, we're like, well, we're not going to help Japan out because that is helping the enemy of our friends. Okay. So when Japan invaded Indochina, Roosevelt said Japan could not use money or investments it had in the United States. This is called freezing assets. Japan did the same thing to the United States. Trade between the two countries stopped. Right? If you stop selling stuff to each other, that's trade. That's a bad sign. You're no longer willing to deal with the person. Japan's Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoye and United States Secretary of State Cordell Hull began to negotiate. The Japanese wanted to be allowed to use their assets in the United States. They also wanted to be supplied with the oil. The United States wanted Japan to withdraw from China and Southeast Asia. The negotiations failed. Hideki Tojo replaced Konoye as prime minister. So we had stuff that belonged to people that lived in Japan and their citizens and the country, etc. And we wanted Japan to get out of China, but it wouldn't work out. So, guess what happens next? Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Early on December 7th, 1941, a Sunday morning, 353 Japanese airplanes took off from 6 aircraft carriers in the Pacific Ocean. Their destination was the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, 220 miles away. Their mission was to destroy the American naval fleet anchored there. The Japanese thought they'd be better able to conquer land in Asia if these American ships were destroyed. So, since America did not want us to be in Asia, since America would not buy their steel and their oil, or sell them oil, I should say, and sell them steel, and we did not want to do any business, and we kind of froze up a lot of things, we kind of set ourselves up as the enemy of Japan. Is there a good reason for that? Well, yeah, I mean, they took Germany's side. They're taking the side of people that we saw as developingly evil, all right? So it doesn't mean that we made them attack us or it was justified for them to attack us, but they wanted to be successful and they saw the United States as being in their way, plain and simple. Infamy, again, going to that, that'd be a good word to describe this attack on Pearl Harbor. Japan bombed ships in the harbor and planes on the ground. The surprise attack occurred at 7:55 a.m. 2 hours later, the United States Pacific Fleet had lost many battleships, destroyers, and planes. The attack killed more than 2,000 Americans. Roosevelt said that December 7th, 1941 was a date which will live in infamy. 4 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States. Japan followed up its attack on Pearl Harbor by invading the Philippine Islands and other areas in the Pacific. American and Filipino troops fought the Japanese. However, they lacked planes, tanks, and ammunition. Japan gained another victory and now controlled the Philippine Islands. Okay, so it was not just the United States or the Hawaiian Islands or Pearl Harbor that was attacked. There were other places like the Philippines that were attacked, and Guam. And so anyway, the Japanese were pretending to negotiate with us, and meanwhile they're preparing to attack us. It's pretty sneaky, but pretty smart too. You have to hand it to them. I mean, they pulled off this attack with a lot of success. Took out a bunch of battleships, took out a bunch of airplanes, and we weren't much the wiser. At least we didn't do much about it. Okay, in the caption of the photo, it says the USS West Virginia and the USS Tennessee were among the 19 American ships damaged or destroyed at Pearl Harbor. I wanted to read about this Rosie the Riveter and the women of World War II. Rosie the Riveter and the women of World War II. When America entered World War II, most healthy young men left their jobs for the armed forces. More than 4.5 million women took their place in support of the war effort. The lively song Rosie the Riveter was written in 1942. The title caught on as a friendly label for all women who became manufacturing workers. The song celebrated women's contributions on the home front. Women worked in shipyards, steel mills, foundries, lumber mills, and aircraft and ammunition plants. They learned welding, electricity, mechanics, engineering, and chemistry. Women farmed, drove buses, wrote newspaper features, and played in the country's orchestras. Americans relied on female police officers, attorneys, and doctors. Thousands of American women also served in the military. These wartime changes helped break down job discrimination against women. So, as the men went off to fight, women took on all the jobs that were left behind. Okay, you name it, they did it. Okay, so that did a lot for equality. Japanese expansion in Asia and the Pacific. So, what are some of these lines? That's how far that Japan went. And this is what Japan occupied right here in China before 1939. So in the last section, I said, World War II is really started happening before Germany invaded Poland, and you can see Japan has been the aggressor for a while here, right? 1931, 1937. The core of the Japanese Empire, however, is right there. Okay, certainly with them taking over Korea. Okay, map study. 1930, which two countries of Asia were under Japanese control? Before 1941, which major Chinese cities did Japan control? Okay, so the answer to that is they control Korea and China, and that's in 1930. Um, yeah, that's not really a very. I think they might have meant by 1940. But this is earlier on for. Well, no, yeah. Um, okay. Before 1941, which major Chinese cities Japan controlled? You can see Beijing, that's the capital, Shanghai. You can also see Hong Kong here on the map. Okay. Let's do the review. The United States opposed Japan's plan to rule Asia because it went against the American blank policy with China. You might remember that from previous chapter. Japan, Italy, and Germany were the blank. When Japan attacked Indochina, the United States froze Japanese blank, stopped selling oil and steel to Japan. Number 4, on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Air Force attacked the American fleet at blank in Hawaii. Next, the Japanese attacked and defeated the blank. All right, that's it for today.